This is John DeLallo, and I'm talking to Cliff Fejfar. Cliff lives out in Denver, Colorado, and heard about the Veterans Breakfast Club. Got real interested in it, and Cliff's got some really amazing stories about his tour of duty with the Brownwater Navy in Vietnam. And without further ado, here's Cliff Fejfar to introduce himself and let you know why he joined the Navy, how old he was when he joined the Navy, and I promise you, this is going to be a fascinating interview. Cliff, you're on.
Well, thanks for having me. And I want to say I'm glad to be out there with all the breakfast people from the veterans group here. But anyway, my name is Cliff Fejfar, and it all began back in 1966. I was a junior in high school, and I was talking to one of my friends about what we were going to do after we graduated from high school. We were looking at the draft. We weren't too sure what we were going to do. Up until that time, everything we learned about Vietnam, we saw on the 6 o'clock news every night when we'd come home and have dinner with our family. So it was kind of scary in a way that to think that we were going to have to make up our minds pretty soon. Anyway, Mike and I decided that we were going to join the Navy, and he had already done some research, found out that we didn't have a Navy recruiting office in town. At that time, I was growing up and living in Sioux City, Iowa, up in the northwest corner of Iowa. And they had a Naval Reserve station. And so we went in there and talked to them, and eventually decided that was what we were going to do. We weren't going to go to college. We weren't going to be able to get a draft deferment. So anyway, we were both 16 years old, had to have our parents sign for us, which they did. And soon after we graduated from being juniors in high school, we were sent to boot camp. And I ended up at the Great Lakes Naval Boot Camp just north of Chicago. So spent my whole summer up there in boot camp, came home with a buzzed haircut, and really didn't even tell my friends, where I had spent my summer that year. But right after graduating as a senior, we were waiting for our orders to come in. And finally, I was told I was to report to Treasure Island, California. And if anybody's familiar with Treasure Island, it's kind of like being a troll under a bridge. Treasure Island is actually an island under the Oakland Bay Bridge. And it was man-made, I believe, in 1936. It was used for the World's Fair that they had at that time. After the fair was over, then the Navy purchased the island and turned it into a transit area base where a lot of sailors would go and just sit there and wait for their other orders to come in, which I did. And finally, after going to the personnel office every day, my orders came in, and I was to report to the Mobile Riverine Force in Vallejo, California, which was just about a 40-mile drive up the coast from where San Francisco sat. But before then, I had to go to San Diego and report to a ship down there that was being decommissioned. And the reason they sent me there was they were trying to form my combat training class together. As soon as they had enough people on the roster then I was to report to Mare Island. So eventually, I made it up to Mare Island and started my combat training. So put my Navy blues away. I was given Army fatigues to wear and started the training. And if I remember right, it was about a 3-month training. And in that time, I think we hit every military base on the West Coast. One of them was to go to Whidbey Island up in Washington, and that's where we did our SEER training. That's the same kind of training that the SEALs get, except we weren't being forced to do all the swimming that the SEALs did. But we received hand-to-hand combat, small arms training. One kind of a funny story about the training, one of the places we had to go to for our small arms training was a Army base called Camp Roberts. And I believe it was east of Sacramento, kind of out in the desert. And it was an old World War II Army base. And each time a Navy class would come in, we actually outnumbered the Army personnel that were there. They were using it for training tank crews at that time. But when I first got to the base, it dawned on me, this was one of the bases that my father had gone to during World War II. And so the first night I was there, I got on a payphone and told my dad, I said, "You're not going to believe where I'm at." I said, "I'm at Camp Roberts." And he was just amazed. And I asked him, I said, "Why did you guys have an airstrip in the middle of the base?" And he laughed and told me, he said, "That wasn't a airstrip." He said, "That was our drilling parade ground during World War II." He said, "At any given time, there would be like 4,000 troops out there marching around on this big asphalt area. It was so big you could have landed a plane on it." But anyway, we finished all of our classes and everything, and ended up going to Vietnam. The crazy thing was that while we were taking our classes before we had actually shipped out, I found out that another friend of mine, his name was Ed, and he had also joined the reserves like we did. So I found out later on that Ed had gone to Vietnam ahead of me, and I didn't know where he was, what he was doing, what his detail was. But after getting to Vietnam, we went to a base called Dong Tam. We flew into Saigon, but we had to take a bus. It was an Air Force bus to Dong Tam. And so that was a real eye opener, because we were on the bus, we were driving through all these villages and dirt roads and everything. And the first thing we noticed, there were screens on the window. You could put the window down, but you couldn't put your arm out the window. And the driver told us, he said, "The screens are on there so the kids or anybody can't throw a live grenade through the window." So evidently that must have happened before. The other thing was, if you had your arm out the window, the roads were so narrow that sometimes the buses would sideswipe a truck or something. And if you had your arm out the window, you were probably going to lose it. Actually, I had a friend of mine that did lose his arm in just that way when he was on R&R in Bangkok. But so we got to Dong Tam and lived in a barracks for a couple of weeks until our riverine division came in from a operation. One day they told us, well, pack up your bags. We're going to take you out to the river. So we got on some Tango boats and left the harbor. Dong Tam, I'll tell you a little bit about Dong Tam. It was a joint Army-Navy base, one of the few of anywhere in Vietnam. We were the only joint.
Let me hold you up right there for just a second, because we
Sure.
talked about this a little bit before in the pre-interview. My recollection is the riverine was a joint Army-Navy operation, and it was the first time since World War II. Is that correct?
Well, actually, the riverine warfare, the technique, the idea of using sailors on the river hadn't been used since the Civil War. Back in the Civil War, both sides, North and South, had riverboats. There was the Monitor, the Merrimack, I think it was. But they had developed these low profile type of riverboats that had gun mounts on them. And they were using that to blockade some of the largest cities on the rivers in the South. So after all that was said and done, they finally came up with a new idea on how to reinvent the wheel. And so that's when they developed all these different style of riverboats to put in the Delta. If I can go back to our training, a lot of the training that we did was at the far end of San Francisco Bay, where the Sacramento River comes in. And that area there, it's the Sacramento River is kind of snaky, a lot of bends and turns and everything. And so we would go up the Sacramento River to just, get familiar with what it was like being on a narrow river like that. So that was the closest thing we could find at that time to, being on the rivers in the Delta.
I know your background picture there. You and I had talked about, riverines, and particularly us Air Force guys. We immediately associate the riverines with the swift boats. But you were very, very quick to send me a couple of photographs and to correct me. And you had a very large tender that looked like a World War II LST, I guess, with a helipad on it. The one photo I noticed, there were some swift boats tied up next to it. And then it looked like a giant Higgins boat from World War II. And you told me that was a Tango boat. And I see in your background, there's a Huey that's on a helipad that is actually on a Tango boat. And I wonder if you'd be kind enough to explain how in the world they made a boat, a Higgins boat, large enough to accommodate a Huey helipad.
Well, the Higgins boat that you mentioned, they were actually made out of wood. And you're referring to the landing craft that they used primarily on D-Day during World War II. The Tango boat that I was on was all metal. And from what I was told, when they were manufactured, they would take two of these boats, and at that time they were called LCM 6s. They would take two of these boats, cut them up in pieces, and then put them back together to make one boat. And they were 15 feet wide, 56 feet long, and fully armed and everything. They weighed about 80 tons. When they first brought these boats over to the Delta over there, they called them ragtops. they just had a canvas tent type top to them to cover the well deck. And what was happening was the ragtops would go down the river, and it was so easy to just throw a grenade into the well deck. It would hit the top of the tent type covering and just roll down inside the well deck and explode down there. So this way, with having a hard top on there, it kind of kept us out of the elements, protected us in firefights, but it was also used to medevac anybody that was injured. Now, keep in mind, we would haul 40 troops at a time up the river, and sometimes one of the Army guys would get injured or something like that, or maybe one of the crew members on the riverboat would get injured. So that's how we would medevac them. We would just call in for a medevac. We'd pop smoke on the fantail of the boat. The helicopter pilot could distinguish which boat he was to land on. I don't even know if the pilots at that time, had enough training. I'm sure that some of these pilots made only 1 or 2 landings on a Tango boat, but the top was just, big enough to get the skids on. And so we would have to lower all of our radio antennas, tie everything down so it didn't get blown over the side. But
that's a fascinating conveyance, I guess, for lack of a better word. But apparently, the Tango boat was utilized very, very efficiently.
Well, so getting back to our training, we were all trained as a 7-man crew. And so we stayed with the same crew throughout our whole training. And everyone was more or less trained to do the other one's job in case somebody got killed and we were on an operation and somebody needed to know how to operate the radio, call in our coordinates. You had to learn how to actually drive the boat, how to steer it. That was a major accomplishment, if you want to say that, as it was, because these things were hard to steer. You had levers on both sides of the helm, and if you wanted to go in reverse, you just threw everything in reverse. If you wanted to go forward, you went and pulled them forward. To get acceleration out of the engines, you would twist the handles. Now, all this time you were steering the rudder through the helm. So if you were a helmsman on one of these Tango boats, you had a handful. The other thing is you were, navigating down a river, doing all these hand movements to keep us in the middle of the river while being shot at. So that wasn't an easy task. But after we got to Vietnam, like I said, we spent some time in Dong Tam, and after about a week, they loaded us up on some Tango boats they brought in, and took us out to the big river. All this time, we didn't know what was out there. Well, once we cleared the harbor and saw how big the river was, our eyes got about this big. And then we saw the troop carriers that were out there, and they were there to give us support, food, fuel, anything we needed. So there were 3 of these troop transport ships out there. They were World War II holdovers, and they had a pontoon tied up alongside of it. And that's what we would tie up to every day, was the barge. that was connected to the ship. And I'll just tell you kind of a funny story. My first day out on the river, we tied up to one of the troop ships there. It was called the USS Nueces. And it probably had, I don't know, maybe 80 to 100 crew members on the support ship. So we get our bags and we're standing on the barge, and some guy came down and he said, "Follow me. I'll take you down into your area where you're going to stow your stuff away and pick out a bunk. And when you get your boat assignments, then you'll be transferred down to one of the boats." So 80 of us all climbed up the ladder, and we get on board ship, and we're following this guy, and he gets us down into this compartment, and it's just one huge compartment full of bunks. And he said, "Pick out one and put your stuff away, and just sit here and stand by." So I was putting my stuff away, and I would bend over, put it in the locker that we had, and stand back up. And after about 2 or 3 times doing this, I turned around and something hit me in the forehead. It was like a 2x4 hitting me in the forehead. I hit it so hard I couldn't open my eyes, and all I could see was stars. And when I opened up my eyes, who is standing in front of me is Ed, the guy that signed up with me from high school. And he was on the Nueces as a crew member, which was kind of nice because here I was new in country and didn't have anybody really to chum around with, talk to, or anything like that. So I spent a lot of my spare time chumming around with him, and he showed me around the ship and everything, and told me what he was doing and everything. So that was kind of nice to have a friend that close to me that I could talk to. Well, as I mentioned before, when we were going through our combat training, we were trained as 7-man crews for our Tango boats. But once we got to Vietnam and got out on the river and got connected with our division, they decided to put us in what they called a attrition pool. So they broke up our crew members, and they assigned us to riverboats that needed personnel to fill in for someone who may have gotten killed or went home or was on R&R, different things like that. So I was assigned to a riverboat that the crew, they were missing one crew member, and they had all been in country about 6 months already. So they were pretty battle hardened, I guess you'd call it. And here I was, the new guy. And so I was watching and listening and trying to learn from them just on how to survive out there on the river and what my duty was going to be. So anyway, got all my gear on board and got to meet all the other crew members, and everything was all settled in. And a few days later, they told us we were going to go out on our operation. And we didn't have any troops on board at that time. About the time I got there, we weren't hauling the 9th Infantry up and down the river. So my first operation or mission that we went out on, we had an empty boat. It was just us crew members. And so we were going down the river, and I was in the well deck with one of the other crew members. And we were sitting there on our machine gun stand and had our heads down, not wanting to be exposed. And so I was really green. This was going to be my first operation. If we got into a firefight, it was going to be a real test to me as to how I was going to be able to perform. And so we were sitting there having a cigarette, and I looked at him and I said, you know, you've been here for about 6 months. I said, I know you've been into firefights and everything. I said, what's the first thing that happens? And he looked at me and he said, well, the first thing they will shoot at us will be a B-40 rocket. And he no more than got that out of his mouth. And we heard this noise coming off of the riverbank directly at us. We still had our heads down. And about that time, this B-40 rocket went completely through the boat, underneath the helipad, and maybe about 2 feet above our heads. And when we looked up, we could see the smoke trail coming through the boat. This B-40 rocket didn't touch anything and ended up going through our boat and exploding on the other bank. And he looked at me and he said, and it sounds just like that. It was just ironic, you know, that we were talking about it, and just a split second later, why here, that's what they shot at us. So we both jumped up and manned our machine guns and returned fire. But yeah, that was my first firefight. That was my baptism, if you want to call it that.
So what you're telling me, Cliff, is those Tango boats didn't have a tremendous amount of armor on them.
Oh no, we had plenty of armor. Actually, we had more firepower on that Tango boat than we had crew members to actually shoot them. Down in the well deck, we had 6 machine guns. We had 250 caliber and 430 caliber. Now, mind you, there was only 2 of us in the well deck. And if we went out on an operation, why, we locked and loaded all 6 machine guns. So there was probably a minimum of 400 rounds connected to each machine gun. So if you ran out of ammunition, you didn't bother to reload. You just moved yourself over and grabbed another machine gun. So, you know, we could put out constant firepower. But on the back of the boat, we had 3 gun turrets, and we had a Mark 19 grenade launcher that would shoot out probably 400 rounds a minute, and had a killing ratio of 50 meters, I believe, for each shell. And that was electric fed. Then we had 2 20-millimeter cannons, and that was a big, bulky machine gun that they used during World War II. From end to end, if you stood it up, it was probably about 6 feet long, and it really shot out a bunch of lead. Then on top of that, we had M16s, we had M79s, we had shotguns. So if we got into a firefight, we could probably stand there toe to toe with them for at least an hour, throwing lead back at them. So they used to call us. Yeah. We were like a destroyer out on the river, in comparison to you know, something that had that much firepower.
I was thinking more along the lines of the actual armor plating on the boat.
Well, surrounding the boat, they had what they called bar armor, and it was these rods that you would reinforce concrete with. And so they welded these cages around the boat. If you look real close, I'd have to send you some pictures of them, but you can see this bar armor, and that was intended to detonate the rockets or anything they shot at us outside of the boat before it would penetrate and go inside. Um, Now, around the back end of the boat, where the helmsman was, the boat captain, and the three guys in the gun turrets, there was bar armor around there. And it had about, a foot and a half void between the bar armor and the actual armor of the gun turret. And so we used to fill that up with sea rations. Some people put sandbags in there to reinforce, the protection from the rockets. But most everybody, that's where we stored our sea rations. We were in a firefight one time, and they hit us with a rocket. And wouldn't you know it, it hit the bar armor and hit our sea rations. And after the firefight, we had spaghetti and meatballs all over the back end of the boat.
That's gotta be a mess.
Yeah, but I'd rather clean that up than something else, if you know what I mean. But I want to talk a little bit about. Somebody asked me, well, did you make friends over there? Well, at the very start of our combat training, we were the way you would make friends with somebody, because you had to have, well, they call it now a battle buddy. You wanted somebody that you could rely on, count on, and get to know kind of personally before you got over there, or even after you got over there. But often you would go up to a person and you'd say, "Hi, my name's Cliff. I'm from Iowa. Where are you from?" Well, if that person lived within 90 miles of you, you automatically became friends. And so was the case with me. I met a guy in my uh, combat training. His name was Al. And lo and behold, he lived probably 95 miles from me. So he and I became friends. And once we got to Vietnam, they split up our crew and put us into the attrition pool. And so I lost track of Al for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months. And one day, this boat tied up to us while we were up against the support ship. And I looked over, and here it was Al. And so anyway, we got to talking and everything. And so I got to see Al for about 2 days while he was tied up to us. And one day Al told me, he said, we're going out on an operation in a couple of days. And he said, we're one crew member short. He said, you think you could go with us? And I said, well, I'll ask my boat captain, and told him what was going on. And he said, absolutely no way. You're not going with him. And so I asked him, I think 2 or 3 times. Finally, he told me, he said, get out of my face. I don't want to hear any more about you going on this operation. You're not leaving the boat. So I told Al that I couldn't go. So the next morning, I untied Al's boat, and they formed up a column and they went down the river. And they got about, I don't know, maybe 10 miles down the river. And I could hear the gunfire in broad daylight, which was kind of unusual that close to the base. And didn't realize it, but Al's column got ambushed down river. And a little while later, a friend of mine came up, and he had been to the base or something. And he said, I wanted to tell you, he said, that column got ambushed today, and Al's boat got shot up pretty bad, and Al's in the hospital. And so I think it was the next day, I finally jumped on a boat, went into the base, went to the Army side where the hospital was, and went in there and found him, and he was laying there in a coma. And I came back 2 days later, and he was still in the same situation. came back the third time and he was gone. And I asked the nurse, I said, where's my friend at? And they said, oh, we shipped him off to Japan. So with that, I went back and I found his boat. I packed up all of his gear, and I already had his home address. So I shipped everything I could of his back to his parents. And that was pretty much it. After I got out of the service and decided I was going to look Al up and find out what was going on. So I drove up to his hometown and I found him, and we were sitting there talking, and Al told me that he was pretty much in a coma the whole time. They'd operated on him in Japan and then sent him to the hospital at Great Lakes. And anyway, he told me that I was pretty lucky that I didn't go on the operation with him, because if I'd have been standing at the gun mount next to him, the rocket probably would have hit me right in the chest. He said that's how close the rocket came. And anyway, he told me this crazy story. He woke up in a recovery ward at the hospital at Great Lakes, and he's coming to, and he's looking around, and he still thinks he's in Vietnam, but he's in the hospital at Great Lakes. And anyway, there was a Marine laying in the hospital bed next to him, and Al woke up and he said, "Where am I?" And the Marine said, "Well, you're in Great Lakes Naval Hospital." And so after they talked for a little while, Al said, "Well, hi, my name's Al. I'm from South Dakota. Who are you and where are you from?" And anyway, the Marine said, "My name's Joe, and I'm from Iowa." And Al said, "That's funny." He said, "My best friend is back in Vietnam yet, and he's from Iowa." And the Marine said, "Where's he from?" And Al said, "Well, he's from Sioux City, Iowa." And the Marine said, "What's his name?" And Al said, "Well, his name is Cliff Fejfar." And the Marine looked at him and he said, "I know who Cliff is." He said, "I graduated from high school with him." So
crazy.
it was a very, very small world at times. Yeah. Anyway, let's see.
Now, you were wounded, Cliff, in during your time as a riverine.
Yes. It's kind of weird. I have plenty of stories, but I don't have exact dates. Those kind of things escaped me through the years. But I remember waking up, and I believe it was in March of '69, and we were already on an operation. And I woke up that morning and I felt different. And something just kept telling me, this is your day. This is the day you're going to get it. And sure enough, we had been tied up all night on the edge of this village. And we were supposed to pick up some troops, but for some odd reason, they didn't show up. And so we took off anyway without them. And we got down the river. And I remember I had a brand new crew member in the well deck with me. In fact, he was so new, I couldn't remember his name. To this day, I couldn't remember. I couldn't tell you who he was or anything about him. But I told him, I said, "Okay, this is going to be your job. This is your side of the boat. You're going to man this machine gun if we get into trouble." And so anyway, we were going down the river, and they opened up on us. We got into an ambush, and we opened up fire on the beach. And a lot of times when you were shooting the machine gun, if you cleaned them too well, and had excess oil on them, the barrels would get so hot that the cleaning oil would cause the machine gun to smoke. And sometimes you couldn't really see what you were shooting at. And so that was the problem with me. Except I saw a sampan that was coming between our boat and the river bank, directly in the line of fire. And I yelled at him to cease fire, which he did, and I did. We waited for the sampan to cross our path, and then we opened up again. And it was about that time I felt this big explosion between him and I, and both of us fell back, and we were knocked unconscious for a little while. Finally, I came to, and the firefight was still going on. So I jumped up and tried to man my machine gun, but the shrapnel had destroyed it. It wouldn't fire anymore. And so I thought, well, this is enough for me. I can't do anymore. And sat down, and his face and his hands looked like he had chicken pox, and he had picked him. He was bleeding all over. So I grabbed a medical bag and attended to him. And then I stuck my head up into the coxswain flat up there where they were manning the helm. And I told him, I said, we need help. I've got an injured man down here. So after we cleared the area and got out of the firefight, one of the guys jumped down, and we started working on this guy. And anyway, this friend of mine, Ed was his name, he turned around, he grabbed the radio, and he called in for a medevac. And they asked him how many, and he said 2. And after he put the receiver down, I said, 2? I said, who else got shot? And he said, you idiot. He said, you're going with him. And I didn't realize I'd been shot. I had shrapnel from the top of my head all the way down to about my belt line. And I had a big piece of shrapnel through my arm. But during the concussion and being thrown back, I didn't even realize I'd been wounded. The only thing that saved us, and it turned out it was a 75 recoilless rifle that they'd shot at us. When it went through the boat, it hit a piece of steel that they used to pick the boats up out of the water. They would put a grappling hook through this hole in the steel, and it was about 12 inches thick. Well, it turned out that the shell hit that big, thick piece of steel and just threw shrapnel all over. And it kind of deflected it from us, even though we still got hit. But anyway, they landed a helicopter on our boat, and he and I jumped on there, and they flew us off. I was in the Army hospital for about 5 days, and they were every day they'd come in and they would pick shrapnel out of me, and finally they got me all patched up, and it just felt like I was wasting time there. I was capable of walking and talking and whatever, and one day I just grabbed my medical records and said I'm checking out, and I left. I just left the hospital and walked down the road and found a riverboat and ended up back out on the river. But it was kind of funny. The day I got shot, I had a pair of tennis shoes on. My mother had sent me a pair of Levi jeans, and I had cut them off, and I was wearing cut off jeans and a t-shirt, or not even a t-shirt, and tennis shoes. And that's what I was wearing when I got off the helicopter at the hospital. And the guy that I reported to at sickbay there, he thought I was a mercenary because I probably hadn't had a haircut in 6 months, and I was so ragtag and and everything. Our riverine division out there was kind of like McHale's Navy. We pretty much did what we want. We didn't have to stand inspection. Uniforms, you could go around all day long in a pair of boxer shorts and nobody would say anything, because it was so ungodly hot out there. But yeah, the dress code, we didn't have one.
Outstanding. Your commanding officer must have been one hell of a guy. That's
Oh,
all
yeah.
I gotta say.
Well, the whole time I was there, I never stood inspection. They actually for the Purple Heart ceremony, that was the only time I actually was in full uniform the whole time I was there, and that only lasted for about 15 minutes. But the whole time I was over there, I reported to an E5. That would have been a petty officer bosun's mate. And the funny thing was, while I was over there, I got field promoted twice. So in 6 months, I was field promoted up to an E5, which is pretty unusual for the Navy because you have to take a test and you have to have enough time in service. And they just kept, coming up to me and saying, we're going to increase your rank and everything. And I said, okay, fine, whatever.
Now, when you rotated back to the States, finally, after that year or year or more, running up and down the river, I understand that you took on a rather interesting job that gave you a rather interesting email address.
Oh, this was long after I was out of the service. I retired from the post office after 39 years. And so it was kind of funny. I was visiting my in-laws one day after work. I was in my postal uniform, and my mother-in-law's sister from California was visiting, and she was married to a big shot doctor out in California. And I was sitting there and having something to eat, and my father-in-law had the TV on, and they were showing some old reruns of Cheers. And anyway, I started laughing about something on the program, and my mother-in-law's sister said, "What's so funny?" And I said, "Well, I'm sitting here watching Cheers, and you got Cliff Clavin on here. He's in uniform." And I said, "My name's Cliff. I'm sitting here in uniform." I said, I kind of get a kick out of some of the stupid things that he says about the post office." And she said, "You really think he's funny?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, when I see him, I'm going to ask for an autograph or something for you." And I said, "What do you mean when you see him?" Well, it turns out that John is his real name. His mother-in-law was diabetic, and she lived down the street from where she lived out in California. And she would go down there and give her insulin shots. And sure enough, a week later, I get an envelope in the mail. It's an autographed picture of Cliff Clavin in uniform with a little saying on there. It was keep your hearts pure and your socks white. That was what he wrote on there. Yeah,
That's terrific. And
so anyway, so that's why I have the email address of Clavin.
that's tremendous. And like a lot of guys, Cliff, and I know you when we talked earlier. Obviously your time in Vietnam is going to interest a lot of people, but not unlike a lot of guys our age. Once you retire from the post office, I understand that you continue to serve, and I applaud you for that. And I wonder if you might tell the Veterans Breakfast Club, and please, don't be shy, because I was absolutely impressed when you told me what you do for and with veterans today?
Well, after I retired, I had about a year off, and actually, I was hiding from my grandkids. They hadn't realized I'd retired yet, and so the first year of retirement was really the best. But it all got started. I got a call one day from someone connected with the honor flight. And it turns out that my father-in-law, who was a Marine, 3rd Division in the Pacific during World War II, somebody had put his application in to go on one of the trips to DC. And anyway, they had my number down as a reference. And I told the person, I said, I don't think he should go. I said he has dementia and it just wouldn't be a good trip. But anyway, turns out the gentleman I was talking to was, he was a Coastie. He was in the Coast Guard during the Vietnam War. And we were talking and everything. And anyway, before it was all said and done, he had talked me into being a volunteer for the honor flight. And so I got involved with them. One thing led to another. And before it was over, I had 6 years in with the honor flight as the vice president for the hub out here in Denver, Colorado. If that wasn't enough to keep me busy, I ended up joining the Vietnam Veterans of America, our chapter out here, 1071. And so now I'm on the board for that. I have kind of resigned from the honor flight. I don't do that anymore. I had to kind of cut back on my volunteering because since Vietnam, I've had cancer 4 times, and it was all due to Agent Orange. And so right now I'm cancer free, and decided, I can't let that stop me or slow me down. But we have quite a very active chapter through the VVA. One of the things we do that is very worthwhile to us is that every spring, and we've been doing it for about 6-7 years now, we have a project called the Speakers Bureau. And we go to about 12 high schools every spring, and there'll be 4 or 5 of us. We will go in and spend 2 days at the high schools explaining what it was like to be in Vietnam, how we got involved in Vietnam, teaching them firsthand what it was like, rather than what they can get out of their history books, which is very, very minimal. So that's something that we do that's very enjoyable for us, and it's something that we started, and we must be doing something right because the high schools still want to have us come back.
Well, while it's certainly not unusual for veterans, to continue to serve, your activities are far and above more than what most of us do. A couple of us, get together and do a little of this, a little of that, so on and so forth. But I applaud you for sticking it out. And congratulations, by the way, on being cancer free. That Agent Orange is pretty nasty. It's taken a few of my friends as well.
Yeah. One of the other projects that we have, it's called the Honors Burial. One day I was at one of our meetings. We always have a breakfast before our membership meeting. And I was sitting there with a bunch of other veterans. And I asked somebody, I said, has anybody heard of this urban legend or rumor about unclaimed veterans that are sitting around at these mortuaries? And nobody knew what I was talking about. And one guy that showed some interest, he said, well, what do you call it? And I said, well, for lack of a better word, I've heard it called vet on a shelf. And unbeknownst to me, 5 days later, he called me up and he said, I've researched what you told us at breakfast. And he said, I found out everything there is about what you said, and it's true. And I couldn't believe it, but he had single-handedly contacted the largest mortuary out here in Denver and found out that the mortuary was sitting on 1,300 unclaimed remains, cremated remains. Now, they weren't all veterans, but the mortuary agreed to allow us to come in and document all the remains, put them in a category to where that if somebody came in and said, I'm looking for Uncle Larry, now they would be able to find him. So after, it was kind of weird because I'll never forget it. It was 2015 and it was Halloween day, and 14 of us are sitting with our laptops at a mausoleum out in the middle of nowhere, going through unclaimed remains, boxes of ashes with just a letter on top of it. And so after we recorded everything, then we had to submit these names to the VA. Now the VA would verify if they were veterans or not. So once we got all the names of the veterans, then there is a state law out here in Colorado that allowed us to become the custodian of those remains and see to it that they had a proper military burial. So the first funeral that we had out here at Fort Logan National Cemetery, we reburied, well, not reburied, but we interred 40 veterans all at once. And then the next one, I think we placed another 40. So through all those years, right now, we're up to about 140 veterans that we have reclaimed and placed at Fort Logan National Cemetery.
Cliff, you strike me as a guy that just doesn't want to sit still in a rocking chair. What are your plans over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years?
Oh boy, I don't know. I've got some things in the wings, but you know, a lot of your plans get changed. It's because life gets in the way, and so you know, you can't always pursue everything you want to. And as you get older, things start to slow down. But I'm going to continue as long as I can. As I said, you know, we have a lot of projects with our VVA here out here in Denver. But if I can get back to the high schools, one of the things that we're so proud of is that they want to hear from us. And so we have a speakers bureau. We've got about 15 veterans that we choose from to go to various high schools. But one of the points I always try to make to the kids at the high school is that we were their age at one time. And it just seems to me that every generation is going to have some kind of a military conflict that they're going to have to deal with. You know, if you look through history, it pretty much shows that. But one of the things I try to instill with the high school kids is that, you know, we were sent to Vietnam on the egos of our politicians. We believed everything the government told us. We were fighting an enemy that we couldn't see, and we were fighting a war that had no end in sight. And that last statement means so much more to me than all the rest, because I think not being able to accomplish an end to the war that we fought over there is something that has bothered, well, I know myself and probably plenty of other veterans from the time they got out until now is you just didn't accomplish enough, or maybe you didn't do enough while you were in Vietnam. But as for the general population of military people over there, it was a war that was pretty much out of our hands. We did the job that we had to do, and we did it the best we could. All the decisions were not made for us, or they were made for us as to how we performed over there. So I think that was the biggest problem I had when I came back was, and that's why a lot of veterans, when they came home, they didn't talk about Vietnam. When we got back, we couldn't even join the VFW. They didn't want to have anything to do with the Vietnam veterans. I'll tell you, well, you probably heard a lot of stories of veterans coming home and they were confronted with protesters, and they were spit on and called baby killers and all this and that. I never ran into anything like that. My Vietnam hat that I have on now, I'm never without it. I always wear it. A lot of people come up to us and they'll want to shake our hands and say thank you for your service, which is nice. I appreciate that. But it always seems to be the same age of person that wants to come up and say something to us. More people our age. But I think we've kind of paved the ground for the new military that's out there and being discharged, because if you see somebody in uniform, people are coming up to them all the time and thanking them for their service. The one story that I have left of when I was discharged, I received my discharge. I was already back in the States. I was in San Diego, and I was discharged April Fool's Day, 1970. And when I woke up that morning and realized it was April Fool's Day, I thought, oh, this has got to be a joke. There's no way they're going to let me out. Well, as it turned out, that was my discharge date. And I had bought a car already and was planning on driving from San Diego back to Iowa. And one of the guys on my ship at that time was also being discharged, and he lived in Kansas or Missouri, I can't recall, and asked if he could hitch a ride with me back to the Midwest. And I said, sure. And so we got up that morning and got dressed, had breakfast, grabbed our sea bags, and got off the ship. And the other thing we each had a manila envelope with our name on it, with all of our paperwork, our discharge, military, medical, everything was in there. And so when we got to the car, we threw our sea bags in the trunk and threw our envelopes in the back seat, and off we went. Shortly after we left San Diego, we were on the interstate, and we were coming up on a border check where they were looking for illegal aliens. And sure enough, they gave us a signal to pull over, and we had to go into their little compound there. And this border patrol came up to the car, and I rolled down the window, and he said, step out of the car and open up your trunk. And so I got up, opened the door and got out. And on the way back to the trunk, he said, are you white? And I said, yeah, I'm white. And I thought it's just some weird question they're going to ask, to see if I'm an illegal alien. And so I opened up the trunk, and he saw my sea bags, our sea bags in there. And he said, okay, you can close it. And while we were walking back up to the driver's side door, he asked me again. He said, "Are you white?" And I got a little irate with him, and I said, "Yes, I'm white. Don't I look like I'm white?" And he said, "You can go now." And so I get in the car, and we're going down the road, and the guy that was with me, he said, "What was all that stuff about him asking you if you were white?" And I said, "Well, he kept asking me if I was white." And finally, he started laughing, and he said, "Look in the back seat." So I looked in the back seat, and on the top of our manila envelopes were our last names. And I forgot that his last name was White.
Cliff, that is a perfect ending to a tremendous interview. And from all of the folks at Veterans Breakfast Club, I want to thank you for your patience and sitting this long, sharing your story. So I'm going to give you the last word. And I know you've kind of fallen into our Veterans Breakfast Club net, and I think you have a few parting comments for all the folks at Veterans Breakfast Club.
Well, it's kind of funny that our VBA magazine, our last edition, had an ad in there on page 6 of the Veterans Breakfast Club. And so I thought, well, I'm going to see what you guys are all about. And so I looked you up on your website, and it was so easy to get involved on one of your Zoom programs that you hold every week. And I found it very refreshing that it's not always just one subject of being a veteran. It's a various amount of information of people that have lived the history, done their service, and want to share stories. And that's what the Breakfast Club is all about. And I really, really appreciate you guys being out there and doing what you do. And trust me, I am sharing your information with any other veteran that will lend me an ear, so I can tell them all about you guys.
Outstanding. Cliff, thank you so very, very much. Again, the story is just amazing, fascinating. I had no idea what a Tango boat was, and it's just phenomenal. Thank you for the website, for the Mobile Riverine Association, and we're certainly going to have you as a featured interview moving forward.
Well, thanks, John, and thank you for allowing me to share just a small portion of my stories.